Hello, it's me, Darkfry, your sleep paralysis demon, and I know nothing about music.
And why the hell are you making this video?
I'll explain. Music is a universal language. We all listen to it, and it invokes a visceral emotion in most people. Everyone has songs that mean a lot to them for one reason or another. Maybe they heard it at the perfect moment in their lives for it to resonate, or it was the song that played when they were out with their friends, causing a nostalgic feeling. This also holds true for music in movies, anime, and especially video games. I don't know music theory, how to write or produce music. The only instrument I can play even semi-decently is the glockenspiel. I don't even know how to critique music beyond a surface level. What I do know is how it makes me feel. Growing up, my exposure to more conventional music was very limited, and I played a shit ton of video games. So, I get very strong emotional reactions from video game music. Obviously, music is important in any form of media. Hopefully you didn't need me to tell you that. But I'd like to explore what makes video game music special to me. Yeah, folks, this is gonna be a particularly personal one, so join me on this journey. As I said in my villains video, you don't experience games like you do other media. It's much more direct. Usually, the barrier that separates player and player character is either non-existent or paper-thin. I think this is a major reason why video game music invokes much stronger feelings from me than a movie, show, or anime soundtrack. When you listen to a piece of music, your mind drifts to the moment you heard it for the first time. The time you hear a song, where you are in your life at that moment, plays a massive role on how it affects you. It creates a memory. Mario & Luigi Superstar Saga is the first game I ever played. When I was a kid, I had severe asthma and had to be bedridden for large amounts of time. So, my mom gave me her Game Boy Advance with Superstar Saga, and I played it for hours and hours, until I got stuck on the infamous Teehee Valley escort mission. I was stuck in this area for days. I had no idea what I was supposed to do. I didn't even know English back then. All I did was wander around and listen to the music. I fell asleep to this song many a time. It was the first piece of game music that really stood out to me in my mind, creating a memory I'll never forget. If you tell me to think of a song that gives me a strong feeling of nostalgia, this is the first that will pop in my head. Not that I'm nostalgic for when I was severely ill and bedridden, but you get the idea. That memory isn't the only thing that comes into mind when I hear this track, though. In the game itself, Teehee Valley has a history. It used to be full of luscious greenery, water, and life, but now nothing but a vast desert remains. Everything in it long gone, and everything you encounter is either dead or undead. The music here is somber, different from the rest of the game. There's this one part of the song that always stuns me every time I hear it, where the backing instruments stop playing for about a second. Without fail, a rush of emotion hits me like a train in this part. The song itself is taking a moment of silence. To me, it sounds as if it's mourning the loss of life here. When I finally understood the actual context of the song and the subtle tragedy it conveys, it felt like giving child me some closure. Now, this song that means so much to me has even more meaning because of its actual context. The song never changed. I did. And yet, it felt like this song was growing with me. These memories, the experience of playing this game I adore and growing up with it, are inseparable from this simple piece of music in my mind. Video game music works in two ways. It doesn't just make you reminisce of memories from your real life, but also from your virtual experience within the game itself. This is especially true in RPGs, where the soundtrack plays an even bigger role. Why? Well, it's right there in the name, role-playing game. RPGs put you in another character's shoes, in another world, and tell you to participate in this grand adventure and have a lot of fun doing so. You, the player, being an active participant in a huge story, though, means that the game will demand many things from you in return. You need to make decisions, have emotional reactions to the events of the story, help the characters with their struggles. In other words, play a role. What about blind playthroughs, though? What happens if you're experiencing the story for the first time? Playing the role, then, can be a bit problematic. How can you be an actor in a story if you don't know the script? Music is the answer. Music is your cue. Music is your guide. To show this, I want to talk about one particular series that I hold very close to my heart, and is probably the best example of how RPGs can abuse music. Final Fantasy holds a very special place in my heart. When I was around 11 years old, I got really into JRPGs, because I played my first Pokemon game and my first Persona game, those being Heart Gold and Persona 3 FES respectively. So I got Final Fantasy XII after those because I wanted more, and popped that disc in my PS2. Then my world was changed. The intro cinematic for Final Fantasy XII blew my fucking mind. Literally, I still haven't recovered. My brain was destroyed in that incident, and I've never been the same since. I was such a bright young lad, too. Now look at me. I know I'm not the only one either. How many kids had their mind explode when they heard the Final Fantasy main theme for the first time? I became a Final Fantasy fan before I even pressed start on the title screen of my first game. I didn't beat 12 when I was a kid, though. The combat was too complicated for me to understand. I beat it only after Zodiac Age came out. The first Final Fantasy game I actually beat was 10, which I played the same year, and also blew my mind with its intro. I consider 2 Xanarkand one of the most iconic pieces of game music ever. It's the first thing you hear when booting up this game, setting the solemn mood beautifully. Even without the context, you immediately understand that this moment is important. And later when you play the game and actually understand what's happening in this scene, you can't hear this simple piece of music without the entire emotional weight of Final Fantasy X crashing on you like a ton of bricks. I keep thinking back on the year I played those games. It's when I discovered all of my favorite games and became truly passionate about gaming. It's when I found out how much I adore huge, epic stories like those found in JRPGs. I haven't played anything like them before that point, just Mario games and movie tie-ins like Over the Hedge and Ratatouille for the PS2, and Donald Duck Quack Attack. Whenever I reminisce about that time, though, it's always through music. I remember how excited the battle music of Final Fantasy X made me. I remember being completely mesmerized by Yuna's sending and feeling things. I remember singing along to the Velvet Room music way off key in Persona 3. I remember trying to understand whatever the hell Lotus Juice is talking about in Mass Destruction. And so much more. I could go on forever. Even when I was very young and didn't even understand them all that well, I could still play the role they asked of me. The music of these epic games guided me toward loving them with all my heart. In other, more blunt words, the music told me how to feel. That's what it's designed to do. Games can give you any kind of emotion, but it's the music that really bolsters it and makes a particular feeling stand out in your mind. And it's that feeling you remember. When you experience a moment that feels special for the first time, it becomes a sort of checkpoint in your life, and the melody that accompanies it, a time machine. It becomes a link to a past version of yourself. And whenever you think of it, time, to some degree, seems to collapse. There's another reason I gave special mention to Final Fantasy besides my personal attachment to the series. Final Fantasy is the perfect example of the massive role music plays in games, and doubly so in RPGs. Each and every one of these games puts you in the shoes of someone who's about to embark on a massive adventure. They thrust you into a vast world with a rich history and lovable characters. However, the worlds, stories, and adventures presented in these games are separate. They all stand alone, existing in their own bubble, not establishing any coherent timeline or mythos with the other entries, with a few exceptions. Despite this, Final Fantasy does feel like a cohesive series. The games do have things in common. They have a status quo. Certain terminology, spells, characters, character names, chocobos, moogles, Malboros, to name a few. The biggest thing, though, the anchor that chains all these games together, is music. I don't think it's in any way an exaggeration to say that Final Fantasy owes its iconic, legendary status to its music. Like I said before, how many kids had their minds blown by the main theme like I have, from even the very first game in the series? I adore the title screen of the original Final Fantasy. I can easily imagine some little kid playing it back in 1987 or 88, beating the first boss, saving the princess, having a lot of trouble doing so. But his reward is just a bridge to an even bigger continent. Soon as he crosses it, he gets hit by this beautiful melody and a message that the game is just now starting. You just know that kid will remember that moment forever. I don't know exactly why the first Final Fantasy was such a huge hit, but I'm willing to bet that this here title screen is like at least 40% of the reason. The epic story beats in these games are inseparable from their music and are enhanced more than 100-fold by it. These games can change anything they want. They can be linear corridors for all I care, but you can't hear the prelude without thinking Final Fantasy, including the one from 10, which they made super funky for some reason. Anyway, odd decision. I love it. When you hear the main theme, that's Final Fantasy. When you hear Battle on the Big Bridge, that's Gilgamesh. You cannot separate these moments and places from their musical melodies. If the former is the body, the latter is the soul. Final Fantasy doesn't just have iconic music that brings them all together, though. Since the beginning, Final Fantasy was way ahead of its time when it comes to the role of music in game design, and since its first installment has been setting examples for the still larval industry to follow. My favorite example of this is Final Fantasy IV. 4 was my third game in the series. I played it right after 10 on my GBA, and there are so many moments in this game that use music so well that made such an impression on me when I was a kid, and I want to talk about two of them. Okay, so a small crash course on the plot of Final Fantasy IV for the uninitiated. See this guy? He's Golbez, and he's really evil and powerful. He and his 4 best buddies, the elemental archfiends, are doing bad stuff all over the place, and you have to stop them. Now, all 4 of the archfiends are awesome, but the important one here is the first one you face in battle, Scarmiglione. His encounter is absolute genius. His fight has 2 phases. In the first one, the regular boss theme plays. Now, most of you are probably familiar with the boss theme of Final Fantasy IV, simply known as Battle 2. It's incredibly catchy, one of the most iconic tunes in the series. You hear it and you think, oh yeah, boss fight, here we go. After you beat him, he comes back from the dead. Phase 2 starts, and this is the music. Is it gone? This song is so immediately terrifying, it's so good. It instantly makes you scared shitless of the archfiends, and I know for a fact that's what they were going for. This song is literally called the Dreadful Fight. It makes you fear fighting them, and it works with the gameplay too, since they're among the toughest fights in the game, especially in the DS version. DS Barbarisia still gives me nightmares. The second moment is when you face Golbez himself for the first time in a crystal chamber. He's super strong and intimidating, and the music that plays isn't any boss theme, but his music. This isn't your fight to win. This is his moment to fuck you up. This song perfectly communicates that you don't stand a chance until this happens. This is one of the hypest moments in the entire series, in my opinion, when a seemingly hopeless fight with such oppressive music turns around in the blink of an eye. So awesome! I can't think of many games that pull this off, and Final Fantasy IV does it just by changing the music at the perfect moment. To me, music is the reason Final Fantasy is more than the sum of its parts. With everything being separate, it's what gives it its identity. When you play one game and love it, unbeknownst to you, you have become attached to Final Fantasy as a whole. Since it's an RPG, you are role-playing, becoming completely immersed in its world, having a virtual experience that might become special to you for one reason or another. I keep hearing about games you can't replay. I always found that interesting. The unfiltered experience of playing a game for the first time is something that can happen only once. And some games lose their magic on repeat playthroughs. In my mind, though, music is a time machine. So many times in my daily life, whether I'm walking somewhere or listening to a university lecture, I'll just absent-mindedly start humming a tune from a game I love. And when I realize what I'm doing, my mind will just race. At that moment, in my mind, I am replaying that game for the first time. With music, you can relive any experience, virtual or not, anytime, for the first time, and as many times as you want. And to me, that's truly magical.